We'll get started, and if others come in, we'll catch them up, but get going. My name is Bill Berry, and I have been working in issues associated with healthcare communications for about 30 years. And in a lot of that work, our company engages with patients and caregivers and advocates to position them to share their stories, because what we find is that the most compelling way to help people understand a disease state is to hear from people who have a personal experience. And we do this through the media. Originally, it was just arranging television interviews, and now it's shifting to a lot more social media, where there's still opportunities for question and answer, and you can share information. It can be a more dynamic environment, but we still do both media relations and then social media outreach as well. What we like to do in this session is talk about not just storytelling, because all of your lives are stories, but what do you want to do with that? Why do you want to tell your story? And I would like you to rethink this opportunity, not just as I'm going to tell my story because I want people to understand my experience, and start thinking, I'm going to tell my story because I want people to do something. I want them to take action. And you want to think, what is that action? Why are you doing this? Why are you sharing personal information? It's not just for fun, because it's not that fun, but it is to get people to do something. And we'll talk a lot today about the things you can get people to do by sharing your story, but they are compelling stories, they are emotional stories, and you can use them to help yourself and everyone in your community. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is it's just an odd thing. You're going to take what is, the most challenging and most personal part of your life, of your experience, and you're going to share it with strangers. Normal people don't like to do that. It's a difficult thing to do. But you have a chance to use your story to empower people and to change the course of a diagnosis and treatment for other people who are, on your journey as well. And so that's what we're going to try and focus on, is how can we use our stories to have as much benefit as possible. And also, how can we do it in different ways? If it's on TV, if it's in a print interview, if it's on a blog, if you have a website, whatever it is, how can we use our stories to drive action? And it's not fun. Most of us are not Kardashians, right? So we don't like a lot of publicity, and especially about personal issues. But by doing this, you can get people to change their behavior or their perceptions of you, of your community, and even of the healthcare system and how responsive it's being for you. So it's a really important opportunity, and you can use your story to do that. What I said at the outset, though, is really important. You don't want to do it just to tell your story. You want to do it so people do something, and we have to figure out what that ask is. And you have to make sure that that ask is in your story. But so it could be you just want more people to know what a leukodystrophy is. It is frustrating to have a disease that very few people have heard of. Or even if they've heard of it, they still don't know what it is. Or they have misconceptions about it. So you spend a lot of time helping people to understand what the disease is. And then you can potentially help more people get diagnosed or diagnosed faster. If you use your story, you can help people, government people focus more on leukodystrophies. You can help regulators focus more on leukodystrophies. You can get more resources available for people through advocacy groups or through government, however. And you can also support the advocacy community, so more people like you will join in efforts like this, and it just builds on itself, which is a great thing. So all these things are possible just by you telling your story. This is one example of a woman who told her story and who made a difference that affected healthcare around the world forever. Her name was Abby Myers. And she was tough as nails. And she had a child, a son, with a rare disease. And this was in the, I think, late 60s. And she got frustrated that no one had ever heard of this disease. There was no information. No one was paying attention to it. And it really pissed her off. And so she started just talking, because it was all the only power she had. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. All she could do was just start talking about her disease. And a little at a time, she got more and more attention. There was no social media, so it was always going to the newspapers or TV. And there was an article about her experience in the LA Times. And in LA, the TV show Quincy, which many of you might not remember, but it was a cop show, doctor show from the 70s. One of the writers there read the story and thought, oh, it could be an interesting story for us. So they did one of the first TV shows ever to focus on rare diseases, using some information from Abby's story. And that inspired all kinds of people across the country who had either a rare disease themselves or children with rare diseases to start calling people. And there was no social media, just trying to find people and recognizing that they were not alone, that there were others who had this experience. And so Abby founded an organization called the National Organization for Rare Diseases, NORD, which is probably the most influential patient advocacy organization for all rare diseases. They cover everything. And through that effort, she wanted to get more people doing research to try and find treatments, because at the time, there were 6,000 or 7,000 known rare diseases, and there were treatments for maybe 5 or 6 of them. So she was responsible for developing the Orphan Drug Act, which is, as many of you probably know, helps companies to invest in rare disease research and make sure that they can make a profit off of it, so more of them decided to do it. And so since that time, the number of rare diseases with treatments went from, 5 or 6 to I think 600 or 700 now. Now there are 7,000 rare diseases. Most of them still do not have treatments. There's a long way to go. But by telling her story, she inspired this action that has benefited millions of patients around the world. And it's just one example of what you can do. It doesn't have to be on a global scale or a national scale. It can just be in your community. It can be in your family, whatever it is. But by telling your story, you can make a difference. And we're going to talk about how that can work for you here. You're not just telling your story. You're not just being nice and saying, my story is compelling, I want you to hear about it. You're doing it because you want people to do something. You want people to take action. And as you tell your story, even one-on-one with someone, you should be telling them what you want to do. And there are lots of ways you can ask them to do something. But the goal is to tell your story to drive action. You want something to happen. And you have to figure out what that is before you get started. And then a lot of it is, you want people to understand what this is. What are these diseases? How can you understand them better? How can you support people with these diseases? That's basic information that can be helpful to a lot of people, and that's a nice place to start, because still, even though there have been meetings like this for a while, people just don't know what they are. They don't understand them. It's not on the radar. So together, we've got to make sure that starts happening more. And then you can talk specifically about your journey in ways that can help other families if they face a similar challenge. For example, if you had trouble getting a diagnosis, or if you didn't get a doctor who was compassionate enough, or you couldn't get reimbursed for certain treatments you need. All those things are parts of your story that can help others to sort of take action as well. And it's really important to, when you talk about your experience, use real world examples. So the basic information about almost any disease is this disease stinks. But the helpful information is, I could no longer work. I am not as mobile as I was before. I was not able to take care of my child. All those specific real life examples, and the more the better, help people to understand the burden of disease. They also help doctors understand it better, and they help the FDA understand it better. And we'll talk about dealing with the FDA a lot today. As you think about who you're talking to, think about who's the audience. If it's patients who are familiar with leukodystrophies, then you can start at this level of, understanding. If it's just the general public, you have to start down here because they don't even know what a leukodystrophy is. If it's doctors, maybe they have more clinical understanding, though a lot of them don't. So you have to figure out where that is. And even if it's at the FDA, a lot of them have never heard of leukodystrophies. And so you have to figure out where you start, what type of information you provide for context, but you have to do that. You should know how long you have. And again, I'm going to use the FDA as an example, but even a media interview, usually you'll have like a half an hour. So you have to pace yourself. You have to think, okay, how can I get my messages in there in a half an hour? But if you're on TV, like if you were on the Today Show, you get 2 minutes. So how do you tell your story in 2 minutes? I'm going to ask you to do that today. So how much can you share to help people understand your experience in 2 minutes? It's actually a lot more than you think, but you have to move. You have to be ready. So you have to prepare for it. And then how much do they know about leukodystrophy? Again, most people won't know much, so you have to remember that. Why should they care? When we deal with reporters sometimes, when they cover healthcare, we'll say, we have a patient family that has this experience, and they'll say, what's the disease? We'll tell them. They'll say, how many people are affected? And we'll say, there's only like 200 or 300 around the world. And they will say, we can't cover that because there's just not enough interest. There's not enough people who are affected. So we're going to talk about ways to overcome that challenge, because collectively, as you know, rare diseases affect about 30 million people in the United States. That's a big number. And so there's a reason to focus on rare diseases. And just because we're one of them as a subset doesn't mean you shouldn't be covering this issue. And then, as I said, we'll talk about the call to action. What do you want them to do with this information? The three audiences you're most likely to talk to, and I'll add four, I'll add government to this as well. But medical professionals, sometimes they'll understand, sometimes they won't, so you have to, medical professionals can be tough sometimes. And so you have to be tough back at them. You have to make sure they understand the burden of disease. They understand the impact this has on your life, and what risks, what challenges you're willing to take to participate in research or to take a treatment. Or they have to understand that. And the more information you can give them, the better. People in general, that's a hard one because it's a complicated subject, but you have to start somewhere. So if you were on the Today Show, a lot of people aren't even interested in health. They're just watching TV because they have nothing else to do that morning. So you have to talk about sort of what this disease means and the impact, and that's where those stories, your personal stories, really come in handy. And then other patients, caregivers, advocates, that's where you really have to dive in. That's best practices. That's how do you cope with things? How can your learning help other people? That's where you really have to get into a lot of detail that you wouldn't be as specific with in some of these other audiences. When you tell your story, before you start talking, you should be thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to structure my story? And the process I suggest you use is called PSA. PSA means public service announcement, but in this case, it means, what's the problem? Is the problem no one understands this disease, or there's research but I can't get access to the clinical trial, or there's a treatment but I'm not getting reimbursed? What's the problem? Start there. And usually you have to provide some context about the disease, but it's really just why should we look at this? Because it's a societal problem. And then the second thing is, what's the solution? Well, what can we do about it? And that's more access to drugs for people or better insurance coverage. What's the answer? Make sure you include that in your story to give people some guidance on what you want to happen. And then how do we make it happen? Call your congressperson, call the FDA, talk to your family members if you have a genetic disease. Whatever you want them to do, just give them specific steps. And don't be timid about that. If you want the FDA to approve a drug, tell them, I want you to approve this drug and here's why. Okay? No matter how good a speaker you are, if you talk for 20 minutes, people are going to remember three things. So my three things for you are PSA, that's how you should structure your story, and then two things, one called flagging and the other called steering. And these are two techniques you can use to control your ability to tell your story exactly the way you want to tell it, and make sure that the audience gets the messages you think are important. And we'll go through each one of them, but you should do that for every time you're going to tell a story. What are the three things I want people to really take away from my story? You should bullet them out. Don't write exact wording, but just say, these are the three messages I really want to make sure I hit home when I talk to people today. And do that in advance and think about it, because your success in telling your story is going to be based on how many times and how well you get those three messages into your presentation. Okay? This is just showing how PSA can work if you structure it this way. And it's, it changes every time. It's never going to be exactly the same, but you might have to start with, what is the leukodystrophy, or what is your leukodystrophy, and what's specific about it? What's the mechanism of action? What were the symptoms? Just basic information starting there. And then if your goal is to get more research, then that's the answer. More research can lead to more treatments. We have some, we need many more. There are a lot of leukodystrophies that have nothing available. We have to change that. And so being specific about what you want there, and then tell them what to do. Please call the FDA and say you want them to approve this drug. Whatever it is, just make sure that you are telling them exactly what you want them to do. They might not do it, but if you don't tell them, they're not going to have any guidance on what they should be doing, and hopefully some of them will be inspired to do it. And this is just giving some examples. If you do a deeper dive in each of these areas, these are some of the things you can focus on. But you can structure your story however you want. You don't have to use any of these if you don't want to. You can use some of them more than others. Totally up to you. But you have a lot of ways you can shape your story. Use whatever elements you have to make it as effective as possible. Okay. Yeah. I mean, sure. But I think the slides are all going to be available in the meeting website. So, and it'll be on tape as well. So yeah. But if not, I can make sure you get them. So. As you tell your story, there are also some things that are risky, especially if you're talking to the media. Not necessarily big risks for you, but things you should avoid. You shouldn't be talking too specifically about companies or products. You can say it's great that this product was approved, but taking it to an endorsement or not really necessary. People should get that information from their doctor. But you can certainly reference the fact that it's great that a product was approved or that they're doing research, but you shouldn't be promoting companies or products too aggressively. You should never be providing specific medical advice to people. So if you ask a question about what you should do, I would never say you should take this pill, or you should never do that. People should only do that with their doctor. You should always say you want more research. There should be more money, more research. We have to make that happen. However you want to say that, that's always the case. If you're talking to a doctor, you don't have to provide usually basic medical information. But if you're talking to a patient who's recently diagnosed or a caregiver, you may have to. So you have to base it on the audience. And remember that you all have been talking this language for a long time. So you know a lot of clinical terms really well that other people don't understand. And try to remember that, because when you're talking to each other especially, you assume that you understand a lot of things just based on your experiences. But if you're talking to someone outside of your community, even if it's another disease state, so they understand their disease state, they might not understand the terms that apply to yours. So you have to be careful with that as well. I used to, every once in a while, talking to patient groups, include some examples of great presenters, Steve Jobs, Obama. For balance, I would include Reagan because he was a good speaker. But I stopped doing that because you shouldn't aim for that. You should never aim for a perfect TED Talk type of presentation, because then it becomes mostly style and less focus on your messages. So don't worry about that. Just get your messages out as effectively as you can, and that's a good presentation. And that's what you should aim for. The most effective way to make your presentation good is to practice. Have in mind what you want to say, talk through it, use your phone to tape yourself. Really think about it, because if you just get up and start talking, you're not going to remember all the messages that are important to you, and you're going to stumble finding your words sometimes. So the more you can practice, the better. If you do practice and you say someone at home, you do it for them, don't say, "How did I do?" because then they're going to say, "Great." Say, "If you had to change 2 or 3 things about my presentation, what would they be?" And that's where you find where the weakest links are. Some people like to write out every word. Some people just like to talk. Do whatever you want. Whatever works for you is fine. There's no rule about that. I do find that if you have every word written out, then if you get nervous or you get lost, or then you can just read it, for a little while until you catch your breath. So it's nice to have it as a safety net, but if you don't need it, don't worry about it. And we all have our phones now, mostly so you can tape yourself and see. And there's nothing better than watching yourself present, because you'll see things that you didn't realize you were doing, and you can refine based on that as well. Keep it short if you can. Get through your stuff as quickly as possible. If it's an interview, then in most cases, the reporter will set the timing. So if it's a 2-minute interview, you're not going to go over that. You're going to be done. The sad thing about that is if you start a 2-minute television interview and you do it wrong and it's live, you can't fix it. So the more you practice, the better. But if it's taped, you can do it over and over again. If it's a print interview, usually you can say it over and over again. So, the live television interview is tough. So you really have to practice for that one. If you are giving a talk and you have 10 minutes, have something available that says, "I'm at the 5-minute point," so you know you should be halfway done by then. And if not, speak a little faster just to get through. And then recognize that, and we'll practice this, in 2 or 3 minutes, you can get a lot of your messages out. And so we'll try that at the end of my talk. I like to focus almost exclusively on what you say. What are your messages? What are you telling people? That's the most important thing to think about. But there's a lot of fine tuning on top of that. If you think about telling your messages, but you present like this, that sends a message to people, right? So they're not going to be as receptive. You look bored, they are going to be bored. So smile. Make sure that they know you're happy to be there. Make sure that it makes them much more likely that they'll accept your messages, that they'll listen to you, that they'll remember what you say. It's just a nice way to start. If you gesture, I tend to gesture a little bit, that's fine. Do it. If you don't do it. But if you do, every time people do this, and then they think, okay, now what do I do with my hands? I just come back here. I call this the Bill Clinton cup. It's just, my hands are just resting right here, and you just hang there for a little while, do what you want, and then come back here. If you do this, it's fine, but then people tend to fidget, and you squeeze and they turn white and it gets nervous. So you don't want anything to distract from your messages. You just want people to be paying attention to what you're saying. Anything else you do that detracts from that is working against you. So try to focus as much as you can on doing things that feel natural and comfortable, but just focus mostly on what you say. Try to engage with your audience, try and lean in, don't look like you're afraid of them and backing up all the time. Get right in there with them and make sure that they're in there with you, and look at them in the eye and just make sure that they're nodding with you and smiling as best you can. It also keeps them awake if you're staring at them the whole time. Dress neat, clean, and conservative. Again, you don't want anything to detract from your messaging. So if you're dressed in a way that's getting attention for how you're dressed, that's what they're paying attention to. You want them to pay attention to your messaging. So usually boring, conservative, clean, neat, ironed, that's what you need. Use simple language, conversational. Don't make it sound like it's a speech. Make it sound comfortable. And I tend to speak pretty quickly, and I have to keep reminding myself to slow down. And it's not good because when I slow down, I stumble over my words. Like I'm used to speaking quickly, and so that's natural for me. So speak at a natural pace, but just recognize that you might have to slow down a little bit to make sure people understand you. I also find it really annoying if people speak too slowly, because then it's just no energy in the room. So yeah, so use whatever works for you, but in some cases you have to sort of moderate yourself. And I usually put little notes in the slides that say slow down, because I know I'm going to keep getting faster. So it's a good idea to put notes in there to remind yourself. Welcome. We're talking just about how to tell your story, and then afterwards we're going to talk one-on-one about how you can share your personal story and how much detail and things like that, but we're just going through some slides first. Okay. You're talking about a very personal issue, and you're wonderful to do it. I hope you all recognize that. You're all heroes for even wanting to share this very challenging part of your lives, right? And so to do that, you might have to be emotional and get personal. Do not worry about that. Do not worry about holding it in. Do not worry about anyone's response to what you're doing. If there are tears, let them happen. Get it over with and then talk after that. But don't worry about that too much. Don't worry about holding it together. It happens all the time, and it shows that you care. So I wouldn't be concerned about that at all, unless it keeps you from being able to finish your story, which you want to get through your story. And then a story is not a report. It's not an academic issue. It's not a deposition. You don't have to answer every question if you don't want to. You don't have to provide all the details of your life if you don't want to. Recognize that you should think in advance of any elements of your story you don't want to share, and just make sure you do not say them, and be ready for that, because you don't have to share everything. Use anecdotes and examples. I talked about it. It's general to say this is a terrible disease. It's better to say it's a terrible disease because it affects your ability to walk. It made it impossible for me to work. I feel lethargic all the time. Whatever the issues you want to share, but be as specific as possible. Use the tone that you would use with one person with a group. Just keep it conversational. And some of our best presenters, Reagan again, Obama, both Obamas, Oprah, they have a very conversational style. They make you feel like they're just talking to you in a room of 10,000 people. It's pretty amazing. And that's what people respond to. That's what they like best. So try and do that as best you can. And I said, think about things you want to keep private and keep them private. Don't say them. You don't have to. And then in most cases, they're going to invite you to speak. They want you to do this, right? So you're helping them. And so the more sort of insights about yourself you can give, the better. The more examples you can give, the better. But don't feel like you have to have all the answers. If they ask you a question you can't answer, that's fine. You just get back to them later if you can, or give them some sense of where they can get that information if they wanted it. Make sure you have water available, because my voice is going already, so I'm going to have to take a drink in a second. But just make sure you have some available, and usually it's pretty easy to make sure there's a bottle nearby. Make yourself as comfortable as possible. Dress comfortably. Wear shoes that are comfortable, especially if you're going to be standing. I told you about hands. I use the printing cup. Make sure the AV is okay. I had terrific help here today. So, but if I had to do this myself, we'd still be trying to figure this out from this morning. And then don't read off your slides. This is a little bit difficult because I have to keep turning to look at the slides, which cuts my opportunity to connect with you guys. So do that as little as possible. A lot of people present like, if you're using props or visuals, don't read off the slides or boards. Your audience can read. Be aware when you're not looking at that's what happens. And it's easy to lapse into that. Don't let that happen. And I don't know if you'll be using slides anyway, but try and keep your connection with your audience the whole time. Just make sure you're looking at them and they're looking at you. And anything that diverts from your message is going to work against you. If I had a nose ring, it would be a reflection of my personal style. Totally fine. If you want to do that, be you. But when you leave the room, I'm going to be the guy with the nose ring. I'm not going to be the guy who had this message or that message. And that's what I want. I really want you to go with some messages about how to do this so that you can have the impact that you want. So I'm trying to do nothing that deflects from that. I'm trying to focus on just what the messages are that I think will make a difference. And any decision you make that takes attention away from that is going to be working against you. Q&A seems to be the thing that makes people most nervous. So in an interview, the reporter is just going to start asking you questions. And it's scary because you don't know what the questions are going to be. You don't know if you have the answer. You don't want to look uninformed, but you want to make sure you also get your story out. So how do you control that process? So we're going to talk about that in a second because there are two techniques you can use to do that, both of which I mentioned up front, flagging and steering. But you should control how things go from the start. You should be giving your messages. You shouldn't just be following the lead. Again, it's not a deposition. It's your opportunity to get your messages in there, and that's your goal. If you are on a TV interview especially, try to keep your answers short or your responses short, your storytelling short, and leave a few seconds in between the sections of your talk. So if you finish a topic, stop for a second or two and then start again, because then they can edit it easier, and then it's also clearer for people and easier to understand. And I say that even though I'm not doing it myself. I talk too quickly and I thread it all together, and I try not to, but I do my best, and I try to remind myself, as I said, to do that as best I can. If someone's asking a whole bunch of questions back and forth, just cut them off. Just say, I'm happy to talk to you about this later if it's unrelated to what you want to talk about. Steer away from sensitive issues. I'm not sure how many there are, but if there are issues you don't want to talk about, we'll talk about a way to steer away from those. And once you're done with questions, just say, I have time for one more question, and then you're done. So what if you're nervous? Well, you should be nervous. It's a really nerve-wracking thing to do. And so don't worry about that too much. People actually like it when people are a little nervous in a presentation. It makes you seem human, makes you seem like you care, doesn't make you seem like a professional presenter or an entertainer. It makes you seem like a real person. Just have to make sure that the nervousness doesn't keep you from being able to get all your messages out, right? You have to be able to finish your presentation or your talk. So the best thing to do is practice. The more you practice, the less nervous you're going to be because you know what you want to say. We get nervous because we don't know what we want to say. So practice as much as you can. If you don't have time to practice your whole talk, then practice the first few minutes, because if you start strong, usually you build from there, it goes well. If you start stumbling, it's hard to catch up. And as I said, if you have to read your notes or your slides, just do that until you get your breath. And then you're all friendly faces, so I can look at anyone, but sometimes there's not all friendly faces, so just find the friendliest folks and just aim at them for a little while. So those are tips for media and also just meetings like this. But for interviews specifically, there are some guidelines it's important to keep in mind. These are the three things I told you are most important. Your three key messages. What are the 3 points you want to make? Flagging and steering, and we'll talk through them now in a little bit more detail. Your 3 key points. The acronym I like to use for how you put your points together is PSA. public service announcement, but also problem, solution, and then action. And so here's a way to sort of structure your talk so that you tell people what the problem is, tell people what your challenges were, tell people what you think the answer is. It could be more research, it could be funding for a ramp at my home, it could be all kinds of things. But be specific there. This is how we can fix things, and this is what I want you to do about it. This is what I'm telling you my story because I want you to help me. I want you to help my community. Here's how you can do that. Give money to this organization, call the FDA, whatever it is, but think about that in advance and have a specific ask. Don't be afraid, don't be timid. Actually be a little angry and get in there and say, I want this to happen and we deserve this and we can make this happen if we work together and I want your help. Okay, so steering, you're probably already doing. If you're at a dinner or something and you're sitting next to someone and they're talking about politics or something that you're making you uncomfortable, it's just what you'll do is you'll say, oh, that's an interesting, topic. Did you see this movie last week? Or did you read this book? Or did you hear about this new restaurant? You'll steer the conversation away from that topic and towards what you want to talk about. You have to do this in a Q&A and interview as well. The reporter or anyone can ask you any question, right? You have to address the question, and then you have to take it back to what you want to talk about, which are your 3 key points. Now, if you've watched debates, you know that politicians don't do that. They hear the question and they start talking about something completely different, and they don't address the question. And it's really annoying, and it makes them sound like they're evasive or lying, and it's annoying. So you can't do that. You have to address the question. So you can address it by saying, I don't really have a lot of information about that. And then you're going to use a steering phrase, which is, but what I can talk about is this, and then get back to one of your key messages. Or you can say, that's not true, I haven't heard that. What I've heard is this, but what I think is even more important, and that's a steering phrase, is this. And you keep driving the conversation back to what you want to talk about. You'll start noticing now that when you see people interviewed on TV, they do it. And if they do it really well, if you didn't know this technique, you wouldn't notice it. It's just a natural flow of the conversation, but they're taking you on a ride. They're getting off that topic that they don't want to talk about, and they're taking you to a topic that they do want to talk about. You have to do the same thing with a reporter or with anyone else in a question. You have to keep getting back to your key points. You want to make sure that you keep focusing on the things that are important to you, no matter what the reporter wants to talk about. And then, once you're there, you have to keep them there as long as possible so the conversation stays over there. So you just keep guiding the conversation back to what you want to talk about. Don't let it drift, because what happens then is you go in and you want to talk about, we need more funding for research. Say that's your topic. And the questions start coming and you're not talking about research, and the longer you let it go, the further away from research you're going to get, right? So keep bringing it back. So keep saying, yes, that's an interesting point. I'd like to come back and talk about that some other time, but I think the key issue here is research. And then you start talking about that again as well. Okay? Okay, flagging. So those 3 messages that we talked about up front, every time you get to one of those 3 messages, you're going to flag it. You're going to make sure it's the most important thing they hear. They're going to hear you get excited about it. They're going to see you gesturing. They're going to hear you say, this is the most important thing I'm going to talk to you about today. So once again, the 3 things I hope you'll remember from this talk, your 3 messages, flagging and steering. Those can all help you make sure that your story is as compelling as it can possibly be. Flagging is easy. You can say, this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. It can be that simple. But you can also say, this was really exciting. This was something that we didn't anticipate. This is something a lot of doctors have asked about. Those are all flagging phrases. And when you do that, your voice is going to go up, your gesturing is going to go up, all that stuff is going to let the reporter or the audience know this is something I should pay attention to. Okay? There are different types of media interviews, and they all have unique benefits and some challenges. So if it's a print interview, a reporter comes to your house, they have a tape recorder, they have notes, they're going to talk to you for 20 minutes, a half an hour, and then they're going to go back to their office and write a story. So it seems pretty straightforward. Well, the longer you talk in an interview, the more risk there is. Not necessarily bad risk, but risk that it's going to go off topic. So you want to get your messages out as quickly as you can, and you want to stay there. And then once you've done that, don't just let the conversation dribble on for a long time. Wrap it up. It's like, I've got my messages out. You have everything I want you to understand about me. Let's wrap this up. You don't have to keep going on forever. The other thing is, if you have those 3 messages, you don't have to wait for the first question from the reporter. You can say, I don't know how much you know about leukodystrophies. Let me give you a little context here. And then just list your 3 key points right at the beginning of the interview. There are a lot of advantages to that. One is that If you start the conversation that way, it's likely the reporter is going to focus on these three things for your whole talk, which is great, right? But the other thing is it keeps them from jumping in with a question that's way off track, so that you have to keep flagging and steering back, because it's not easy to do that over and over again. So you start the interview exactly where you want. Also, reporters, if they're taking notes or if they're taping you, they've got this long 20-minute, 30-minute thing to look through, right? So they get back to their office, they got to write a story really quickly. They start going through their notes. They go at the beginning and they start looking for points to pull out. And they're going to pull out the first things they can find because they got to get this story done. So if all your good messages are at the end, they might never get there. And they're going to take some quotes. That happens all the time. We arrange interviews for CEOs and even for doctors, and they'll talk for 20 minutes and they think they're great. And the reporter does the story, and the quote is not anything that was important for us or for the doctor or for the patient community, nothing. It was just, an aside that the doctor, and so the doctor will say, well, why did this reporter use this quote? And we'll say, well, did you tell the reporter that this was your important quote? And they'll say, no, they should know that. They don't know that because they don't have context. That's why you're there. That's why you're there, is to help them understand what's important about this issue. And sometimes you just have to tell them this is really important. So don't leave it up to chance. Phone interviews people like because they think it's easy. I can be on my sofa. I can just be relaxed. I can talk to someone. But it's very high risk because you're going to be looking at your emails. You're going to be looking out the window. You don't even know what they're doing. They could be doing the same thing. And so you're not paying attention. So I suggest if you're on the phone with someone telling your story, you stand up and you get away from a window and you just sort of focus on getting this done. Be a little uncomfortable because you're standing, and it'll force you to get things done as quickly as possible, and then not be diverted by anything else. And also with a phone, all you have is your voice. You really have to use that. So you have to get a little louder. They can't see your eyes and hands and stuff. On Zoom, which we should talk about because a lot of interviews are happening on Zoom now, it's really hard. You've got the technology you've got to deal with. If you're looking at the camera, then you're not looking at the screen. And so it's like you're not looking at each other. So it's a complete mismatch. It's really challenging. And so the more you can do to sort of make that natural, the better. We're all getting used to it at this point. But I do think that Zoom is a more difficult opportunity to tell your story. It's challenging. And then TV and radio, short answers. You're only going to get 2 minutes. Do it as best you can. But if it's taped, you can do it over and over again. If it's live, then you really have to practice. If you are on TV, and the producers will tell you this, don't look at the camera, look at the person who's talking to you. Do the flagging and steering, make sure that that's clear, use your gesturing. Wear boring clothing, don't wear bright white with black or dark colors because it bleeds on the camera, and be as simple as possible. And as I said, the clothing just has to fit well and look clean. So now, why should you start talking? Well, what do you want? And what I'm going to ask you to do now is think about how you would tell your story in about 2 minutes. What would you say in that PSA structure that we talked about? So you would talk about what the problem is, what your personal experience was, what's the solution? How can we make things better for you, for your members of your community? And then what action do you want me to take? Why are you telling me this story? So think about that just for a minute. And then I'd like to go through and ask you all to just talk for 2 minutes. I'll time it and see how much you can get done in a 2-minute session. Okay? Happy to answer any questions about this before we do, but if not, we'll jump in and just start talking about your stories. Said that ULF helped you. Do you want people to support ULF? Do you want people to write to their congressperson? Do you want people to? What do you want people to do?
I'm kind of on the fence with that.
Okay.
Because I know that with the dystrophy, there's last time I did a report on that was about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm to the point where I would like for them to know, but I'm not taking action on writing my congressman or anything like that. But we actually be more proactive because it is affecting not just children, but it's
Yeah. Well, the call to action doesn't have to be you should do stuff. You tell us what to do. So, how can we help you after hearing your story? What can we do to make things better for you?
just getting the word out.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Letting the world know.
Good. Okay.
And organizations like Make-A-Wish is one of them.
Great. Good.
Shares specific types of illnesses that children have.
Terrific. Good.
So yeah, us talking to one another really helps.
Good. Okay.
And I think after a year, you're like, oh yeah, I remember this person now.
Yeah.
Sure. But I think I've gone over my 2 minutes. But
That's all right. That's okay.
yeah, it's just sharing our stories with one another and just connecting, experiencing different types of illnesses, but end result I think is the same. You know,
Right.
we're all grieving and we're all coping, and you know, pretty much grieving what our families once were before
Good.
the,
Okay.
the
That was
illness.
great. Really good. You want to go next?
I believe to stand up.
Okay, that's fine.
Black, stand up. No way, they only hear. Hello, everyone. So, my name is Erin Martin. I have been on this leukodystrophy journey for pretty much all my life, but I didn't know until about a year ago when I was finally diagnosed. It took me a decade for a diagnosis, and I traveled all over the country trying to figure out what was going on with me and trying to remember that I'm not making it up, that there is something actually going on that's affecting my walking and that affects my vision and just other things that, you know, that I couldn't quite figure out how they were connected. So I finally got my diagnosis about a year ago, which it was bittersweet. It came at a good time for me. because I finally got to put a name to what I was going through, even though it looks so different for everyone. Because leukodystrophy is a rare disease, and there's so many different ones that have similar sort of impacts, but they're just different. But it's different for everyone. Um, and so, I think there are a couple of things that I think that, I would want people to know. Like, not just, I would want there to be more knowledge about leukodystrophy itself and how it impacts people, not just children, but also adults. A lot of times, people who do know about leukodystrophy know it from a child being impacted, but there are also adults impacted as well. And so having there being more research, because a lot of people don't know, like they know that they may have a disability, a physical disability, but they don't know that it is leukodystrophy. And training our medical providers to like if they don't know the answer, to reach out and reach out to the larger community to try to find answers. And then last, I would also say that having a physical disability has really been a struggle, just getting around, not just my house and my apartment, but just around the community, around how it affects how I see the world. And so there's just so much that I think that people don't understand. There are a lot of struggles, like just with traveling, trying to get from point A to point B, walking on the sidewalk that doesn't have a proper ramp, or just those sort of things. I think even heavy doors, there's just so many struggles, day-to-day struggles, that I feel like if people have are able to look from a different perspective, then they would kind of maybe be able to plan better and build better, so that it would make it easier for other people who struggle with these sort of disabilities.
So that was amazing. Just the intro gave wonderful perspective about your personal experience, and you did it like a minute and a half, but then your examples I could really understand what you were talking about. So the more specific you can be there, the better I'm going to be able to relate. So it was all really, really good. Terrific. Yeah, that was great. And you gave me some sense of what I could do. I mean, you might want to be more specific, like call our congressperson to get these sidewalks with, ramps on them. Whatever you want to do,
Yes.
Be specific. But that was really great.
Thank you.
Do you want to try?
I'm gonna try it. I don't speak English as my native
Okay.
language, so sometimes I can stumble a little bit, but I'm gonna do my best.
I think you're going to be great.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Daniela Vargas. I'm from Colombia. I'm diagnosed with infantile rhythm, that is a leukodystrophy. It's an ultra rare leukodystrophy. So if there's no much information about leukodystrophy in general, there's even less information about my disease. And it has been, well, quite a journey, because I'm gonna talk about how I got diagnosed, about the medical help I can get in Colombia, and also like my personal feelings of belonging somewhere. So first of all, I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old. In Colombia, we don't have the technology needed to be diagnosed. So I had different genetic tests and phthalic acid tests that were brought here to the US by my father, that he was traveling around looking for someone to help us. And we went to the Kennedy Krieger, to Hugo Moser, he was the one that diagnosed me and gave me like the treatment. Then we came back to Colombia. It was really hard in Colombia. Well, my dad was the one that came. It had been really hard in Colombia because some ophthalmologists I have to treat every symptom separate. So we had an ophthalmologist that told us that I was gonna get blind like in 2 seconds, but didn't give me any possibility. Also, I had that problem like with my hearing. They didn't give me any way to go by, so it was hard. Also, there's a lot of issues that I can talk about, but I'm not gonna do it right now. But in general, I treat my symptoms separated, and no doctor really knows what I have. Like I have to say, yeah, I have infantilism, that is this, blah 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 blah. But they don't really know where it is. They don't know what it means, and they treat it like something they know. So sometimes the treatment is not the best. I don't know how to explain it. So yeah, those are two things: being diagnosed, having treatment in Colombia, and the third thing is belonging. At the beginning, I was like, yeah, I'm rare, I'm cool, I have no issue, I want to be special, the only one with this. And a few years ago, I started to notice that I wanted to know if there was someone living similar conditions as me. And I came here last year and I met wonderful people, and I finally felt that I belong somewhere. So I have been a journey of finding more people with similar conditions as me. I have found people in the US, I have emailed some of them, and in other countries. But in Colombia, I didn't find anyone. It was like, I need someone to live with the same struggles as I do.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, a few weeks ago, I met someone with my disease.
For the first time?
Yeah. Well, I haven't actually met her. I spoke with her. I chat with her. So yeah, it has been wonderful to getting to know more people with similar conditions. Also, I have been starting to research more about my disease to understand it better, and having more tools to explain it to people. But I think that is not enough. So I would really love to find somehow to make doctors in Colombia have more information and more knowledge of what to do. Maybe they don't have to know the cure, because there's no cure, but to at least understand what I'm going through and help me a little bit better.
So that was amazing, because you provided good context in 3 areas that are very important to understand. And then you had a call to action. Here's what we should do about it. Just terrific. Really great. Your stories are amazing. You doing good?
I actually, well, so I was going to talk to you on the side, because something that my unique position is
Can you hand him the mic?
Oh, yeah. So I was hired about 3 months ago as executive director of the Yaya Foundation.
Okay. Oh, I met you. Yeah. I met you.
And so part of what I'm in the process of doing is intake right now, because I recognize I have a unique situation to represent
Yeah.
other people's stories in an empathetic way and match that tone to the foundation's voice in both voice and print.
Yep.
And so if I were to take my 2 minutes, it would be to continue to process and continue to audit what this experience eventually will be for me.
Yeah, but it's interesting because often we're meeting advocates who don't have a personal experience but are representing a community, and how do you share perspectives based on that? A lot of these things apply sort of in slightly different ways,
Absolutely.
but they're very usable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can name that I'm a proud dad. I have
Exactly.
children,
Yeah.
right? It's all aligning to what makes me work even harder to ensure access, equity,
Yeah.
everything across the
Right.
spectrum.
Yeah, that's great.
I can go next. I'm going to move over here so I can see all of you. I'll stand anyway. I'm June Chung. I am a parent of a daughter who had 4-H leukodystrophy. I'm also an advocate. My husband and I co-founded, along with several other 4-H families, the Yaya Foundation, which is in my late daughter's name. I'm going to get emotional.
That's okay.
Our story is kind of like many of our families, leukodystrophy family stories, but on steroid. My daughter passed away when he was 30 months old. We went through that diagnosis odyssey, from knowing something was wrong to not knowing what she had, and going through, tons and tons of testings until we finally put a name to what she had, and then found out that there's nothing we could do about it. And it took us a while to find our community. We found the other families through Facebook, Googling about 4-H, and we were able to find information we had. But the doctors that we had, in our community, we had access to wonderful doctors. We live in Minnesota. We had Mayo, we had Children's Hospital there, and Gillette Children's. They're our top medical researchers who knew nothing about our disease area. So we often find ourselves being in the position of educating the doctors, trying to figure out what specialty cares she needed during the very short period of time that we had with her. And we eventually saw the very rapid decline in her ability to live. And she finally passed when she was only 13 months old. So Ron, my husband, and I, with the help of a couple of the other families, including the Triftles, who's been a staple in our community, and the Florists, we finally found the Yaya Foundation as a patient-led advocacy group, and we set out to address some of the main struggles that we had when we were caring for Yaya. The first thing we wanted to do, and the most important thing that we wanted to do, is to support research. Right? We all know that rare disease do not get enough funding because it impacts so few people in the world, and our long-term goal is to fundraise and to support funding, but also in a way that is the most strategic and most impactful. So we have, in the past 5 years, worked with many of the top researchers and clinicians in leukodystrophy field to create a research roadmap so that we can then fundraise to execute on that roadmap to put the money where it's most needed. And so that we can, combine our effort to make sure that we have the foundational research done, have our national history study, create our mouse models, and then to set off to do the next step to create to research therapies and treatments that will ultimately help our research, help our patient community and help our families. The second focus area for us is to support our families now, because we know very, unfortunately, but very clearly, that it will take years, if not decades, to get us to the point where there is a cure, where there's effective treatment for our patients. And in the meantime, we want to make sure that the families, do not have the same experience that we had, or had at least improved experience from what we had gone through, and for many of our families have gone through. So we, and with that, we created a kind of a patient guidebook that our families, especially for newly diagnosed families who were in that situation that we had, where we had no idea who to talk to, where to go, and what to do to help our little girl. So this guidebook will help them to understand, these are the basic information that we have, even though it's limited, but there's a whole, because there are amazing research that's being done. And we have information that they can share with all the different doctors and physicians and specialists, so that they don't feel like they have that burden to educate every doctor, and at least they have the materials to educate them. And we also tried really hard to get people together and give them access to information, to get them direct access to the clinicians and doctors who work in our field. So we have routine, regular or periodic Zoom meetings for our families, so that we can create that community for each other and have them directly meet through Zoom with some of the best researchers in our field, so that they can get the most up-to-date information. And here comes my ask. I would like to ask people to spread the word about our foundation and the work that we do, so that we can get as many people who are impacted by 4-H into our community, to have access to our community and the support that we provide. And ultimately, I would ask people to help to donate to our foundation, so that we can continue on the work that we do and ultimately support the research that's being done in our community. Thanks.
Great. Really great context. Sharing your emotional story like that. For any of you, if you get emotional, do not worry about it. It's a natural thing to do. People will respect you for it. And just make sure that you, as you did, take the time to get your messages out. Just collect yourself and continue going. But the ask, if you have or know of a patient advocacy organization, can be very direct. For all of you, send money to this organization right now. I want you to send money, because we could do, you listed some great things you've already done, even more. We could do more of these. We could do more brochures. We could have more, whatever it is, be specific. People, if they hear you want them to send money, want to know what it's going to be for, and the more specific you can be there, the better. So if there's one project you want to really focus on, tell people to fund that. That's a really good idea. That was great. You're amazing. Can you
Are we out of time? Sorry. I should have went before you. Okay, usually my husband does all the talking, so this is really hard for me. My name is Debbie Triptow. I have a daughter that is 22 now that has 4-H leukodystrophy. We were misdiagnosed in the beginning. They thought she had ADHD. She didn't really have any symptoms where she couldn't walk, couldn't talk. In the beginning, she hit all of her milestones when she was a baby. And 3rd grade, we went to a neurologist. We were referred to a neurologist because the ADHD medicine wasn't working anymore. And she did not pass the testing of all the neurology, and sent for an MRI. MRI confirmed it was a leukodystrophy. 5th grade, we did some genetic testing and found out it was 4-H leukodystrophy. 2014, we met 4 lovely doctors that were doing testing, researching, helping people, and they were all working towards 4-H leukodystrophy. That's where we got a lot of our answers, even though they didn't have a whole lot of answers, but a lot of guidance, thank God. So it's kind of hard to watch your child, or even as an adult, decline. When you're losing the functions of eating, and that's big in socialization, and it's even harder when you get out of school. After she turned 18, it was just hard to keep her spirits up. She got depressed, and so we started to do a golf outing to raise funds, because there is no funding or grants, especially for rare, diseases. So we tried to get the word out. Social media has been our friend with getting messages out to, people that have never heard of it. They've, like, I never heard anything like that. So that's key in getting the word out of this type of disease. The fundraising, we have blessed with a lot of family and friends that come to our fundraiser, and we send it to Yaya.
Yeah.
We've joined forces with them for a great cause, and I don't know, which is hard. I'm not the talker. But we would like the message to get out. Insurance companies, they're not our friend. By the time you get a medical piece of equipment that you need, our kids have passed.
Mhm.
You know, we tried for over a year to get a stander, which would help her with weight bearing. By the time we got it, she had lost core muscles and couldn't, stand or even keep her head up. So insurance companies need to, I don't know a little bit more about the rare diseases that, sometimes it's not, you can't jump through this hoop and you didn't pass that, so you don't get this equipment. It can't work like that. That's one piece I would like to change. Also funding, the government, sends so much money to diabetes, not that they don't need it, but, you gotta spread it out a little. And then, the donating, come to our golf outing.
Yeah.
Although this year we're sold out, so we were very, very blessed, but, just to donate.
So those asks were all really terrific, really specific, understandable. People could and you could do that. It's like, say you were just interviewed on a local TV station. You could drop those in. You don't have to necessarily say, Aetna stinks, or they're horrible people, or they're evil,
Yeah.
but you can say, we would like to talk to the insurers because what's happening is they're not responding fast enough, and we're losing our children. We're losing people as a result. So let's fix that. We're available to talk to them. Even if that's the message, someone might hear it, they work there, and they give you a call. You never know, but at least it plants the seed.
Yeah.
But then come to an event, we're having a golf event, great stuff. People will respond to that, but the more specific you can be, the better. So any of you, if you have an advocacy organization especially, you can reach out to a reporter directly and say, do you want to do a story about our experience? We have, these people who are part of our founding organization who have this compelling story to tell. They want to help other families. And if you're watching TV and you see them do a story about some disease, get the reporter's name, pay attention to that person, and just email them the next day. Just say, listen, I know you're interested in health stories. My story is this. I want to help other people learn about it. Can we talk? And just, you never know. They might say no. They might say yes 6 months from now, but they don't know you if you don't reach out to them. And you can. There's no law against it. You can just reach out to people anytime you want in the media and say, I want you to do this story. When you do that, though, all of a sudden the questions can get a little more complicated. They can get a little challenging. So, for example, this week, I don't know if you saw, but Sarepta had a gene therapy approved for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's going to cost somewhere between $3 and $5 million. And so the question is coming up, how can we afford these crazy prices for these treatments in our healthcare system? We just can't afford it. So how would you respond to that? Like, if there are no treatments, but they're coming, it could be expensive. So someday you might get the question, how can we afford a treatment that costs $1 million? What would you say? Okay, you all have to get better at this answer because it's going to be coming your way. There are lots of ways to answer this. Lots of drugs are expensive, but managing the health of children who are and adults who are compromised is very expensive as well. So net, it's probably not going to be that much different. But on top of that, this is just the first generation of drugs. We've got to get them to the finish line, and they will be expensive, but it means that we're going to get better at this. It means we can succeed. So that in the years ahead, there will be less expensive drugs. But we're not going to get there unless we have successes along the way. We have to keep this going. The other thing is, there are drugs that are less expensive that treat 20 million people for diabetes. And again, nothing against people with diabetes. I understand that. But there are lots of drugs that are expensive collectively. This is a drug that's going to be used by 100 people. So it's not going to break the healthcare system, and it's going to have a profound impact on these lives. So there's all kinds of ways to approach it, but you don't be defensive about it. Don't say, oh yeah, it's too, you're not going to say, oh, it's too expensive, we shouldn't do it. Of course you're going to do it. We have to do this. How can we not do this? And that's why we have insurance. That's why it's supposed to work this way. But I think the message that says, listen, these drugs will be expensive for a while, but there will be better ones coming. We're building on this research. It shows we can do it. Let's keep doing this. Let's keep it going. Let's not stop the train here because we're almost there. But there are questions you're going to get defensive about, and don't be defensive about anything. If you're an advocacy organization, the question comes up, are you taking money from industry? And we want as much as we can get. Yeah. Yes, that is the answer. Yes, of course we're taking money from industry and we want as much as possible. And if the question comes back, well, doesn't that compromise your, integrity or imply you need to say, if you find any examples of us compromising our integrity, you let me know, because that is not happening. What's happening is we're using that money because we know how to use it. They're part of our community. They understand our needs. We're working together to make things better. And, there's some examples of things that are not great about that relationship, but not many. And I think especially the advocacy community is getting tougher and smarter all the time about how to deal with industry. So I don't see many examples of that happening moving forward, but don't be hesitant about that at all. That is the one thing about telling your story, is that most of you approach it a little timid and a little too polite. And I'm going to suggest that you approach it with a little bit of anger and a little bit of a goal in mind. And if you don't get what you want, you're going to be pissed off, and let them know that. Yeah. Yeah. And don't be afraid to use it. Just, that's the reality, is you deserve all the attention you can get. You deserve all the support you can get. And if you come at it too timid, it's likely that it won't happen as much as you want it to. So don't be angry. And don't be angry unless there's a reason to, but if there's a reason to be angry, don't be afraid to. Yeah. And don't be afraid with the ask at anyone, with industry, with doctors. Just say specifically, I want this. You have got to do this. They might not, but unless you say it, they're not going to know. And that's part of your storytelling. So again, you're all so great at telling your stories. Just embed in that story, no matter at what level, one-on-one or a big group, the ask. What do you want people to do to make things better? And if it's send us money, that is fine. Do not hesitate to do that. But if it's support this legislation, if it's call the FDA. So that's a good question. So if you had a chance to be in an FDA session, one-on-one with the FDA, what would you tell them? How specific? Yep. What else? What about? So there's an issue in clinical research for rare diseases, in that the FDA applies a sort of cookie cutter approach to the use of placebo controls, not paying attention to natural history data, and that's fine in a large patient population. It's not fine in a small patient population. And so the message to them has to be, you have to get more flexible. And we can't figure that out for you. You're the experts. You figure it out. But the way you're doing it is not working, because drugs that are clearly safe and that parents are saying are showing benefit, you're not approving. And you're not approving them because you want statistically significant placebo-controlled results in a patient population of 20 or 30 people. It's not going to happen. So be as specific as you can, but don't be afraid to say, I want you to do this. Sure.
Drugs that these doctors are prescribing are doctors that are experienced in this specific disease. They wouldn't be prescribing it because they didn't feel it was going to be good for the patient for them to sustain. So they have a right to do it.
So you want that message for the FDA? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, sure. Let the doctors be the guides. But it has to be reimbursed. Like, if they're using it off label, you're going to have trouble with reimbursement. You're going to have trouble with access. So I think if a doctor's judgment says, I want this patient to have this drug, even though it's not indicated for this, based on the doctor's judgment, it should be reimbursed. And it's often not.
The constant complaining of the drug because the patient aged out or they don't need it anymore.
Yep.
So their neurologist prescribed it, so they need it.
Yep.
And the pharmacy, first pharmacy in this state, constantly, fine, try it. Well, why don't you call me? You call me.
Yeah.
That's not, I'm a parent, but this is something that
Yeah. Well, I think
insurance didn't cover it.
everyone, or so many of us, have stories of challenges with your insurer where you had to fight and fight and fight, but then eventually you get it. eventually it sometimes happens, you know? And so you realize unless you fight, you don't know. You just don't know. And that's why telling your story with a little bit of anger and a little bit of I want you to do something is a great way to start right from the beginning, because they know I'm not going to fool around with this person. I'm going to pay attention here. And so many of you, I hear so many patients especially who'll go on and they're just so timid about the ask. They're so timid about wanting to be aggressive, but you really should be. You just don't worry about that. Just be as tough as you need to be. So then, last question for us. We've talked about all the negative, questions that you can get and how to deal with those. What's your message of hope? If you wanted to, in telling your story, leave people with a sign that things can be better if we do this together, what is your message of hope? Okay, and we can do it. We're making progress. I mean, depending on which disease state you're talking about, some are not even in the clinic yet, but some, there's early stuff that's happening. But unless we do it, we're never going to know. So fund research, because we can make a difference. And we are seeing treatments for rare diseases coming along. The Sarepta drug is a gene therapy, one shot, you're done, and it looks like it works pretty well. Whether it's perfect or not, we'll find out. But we'll build from there. So the next one will be even better. The next one will be even better. But unless we do it, it's never going to happen. So funding research at every stage is really important. Yep. And inviting industry to pay attention to us. If they're not in the clinic with a drug for you guys, say that. Like, we would like a company to come talk to us, find out about the unmet need, find out about the opportunity here. Lots of people need this. We want to talk to you. What other messages of hope? Mm-hmm.
Once you get to that point, you will move past your own selfishness, and you will have a better understanding.
That's great. Yep. That's great.
It took a while, but I will cover that tomorrow.
Yeah.
It took a while, but once you get there,
Yeah.
I won't say smooth sailing because you will have rough patches.
Yep.
But that drives your determination to keep moving forward, and keep fighting back up.
That's really wonderful. Good. Yep. Yep. And how does that make things better? Mm-hmm.
That leads to depression, right? That leads to sadness. That can focus on what we're going to do. We realize there are other folks that there's similar challenges with folks that are able to help and support and are willing to advocacy. So that might be able to help the future.
Yeah.
Folks that may not be diagnosed yet or may not be returned, but kids in the future are going to be able to get treatment and support them. That's the other next step we can get.
That's great. Good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah. I think, we talk so much about the negative parts of the story and the challenges and the emotional stuff, but leaving people with a message of hope is also a nice way to sort of wrap up and also make them more likely to want to engage, because it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope on the horizon. It's not coming as fast as we want. It's going to be stop and start, but unless we work on it together, it's not going to happen. So those messages of inspiration. Keep in mind, though, that those messages of inspiration are they're general. They're not specific. So your examples of the impact on your life should be as specific as possible. The ask should be as specific as possible. I want your money to do a brochure. I want your this for that. And think about that before you go in. And also just recognize that, you know, people have lives with other stuff going on. So they're only going to absorb so much. So give them as much as you can, make it your most important messages, and give them a path forward if there's anything they can do for you. So, was there anything we didn't cover today that you thought we would talk about? Or, I mean, yep.
And so it's a way to stay connected with bringing honor and celebration to everything that's happened in love that
Yep.
first five to be able to pivot and even expand into the capacity to the next one.
Yep.
Which with that kind of brings rebrand, it brings rebirth to, even bigger mission and vision.
Yep.
How would you position
Those are all very much internal issues to focus on. Media will not care. Social media, because you can control it, will care, but not a lot. So I would use it. I would try and keep it as efficient as possible. But if you're going to change your messaging, if you're going to change your look, then just use that consistently moving forward. But the most important thing for an advocacy organization is if there's some event in the community, like research shows promise in a treatment, then they're going to want your perspective. And if they don't ask you, you should write to them. And you should say, listen, I want to offer a comment about this new drug because here's what you should know about it. It's good, it's bad, it's this or that. But you should be in those conversations. And you see in a lot of articles when drugs are approved, leaders from the patient community will talk about it. And that's where you elevate your profile. That's where funders see that you're commenting and having influence. That's where it makes a big difference. So definitely, make a big splash about a change in your look or messaging or whatever, but that's really an internal and constituent thing. It's not a media. But don't be afraid of the media. Go to them, write to them, just say, listen, I want to talk to you about this experience I'm having because I think there are a lot of others who might learn from it. And the other thing about, they'll often say, well, it's a rare disease, no one cares. Talk about rare diseases in general. Reference the fact that they affect 30 million people in the United States. That our learning in one rare disease has applications in many or all rare diseases. We really should focus on it, and we're making progress. And we've got to keep it going because people's lives are at stake. People's families are, challenged. We can make things better if we focus on this. And you can do it by telling your story. And that's what I hope the takeaway is today, is that it's not just telling your story, it's telling your story to change things. And you have to figure out, how can I use my story to make things better? And be as specific about that as possible. Don't just tell your story. Sure. Yeah, I would definitely do it because it's very compelling, as you said. Now, did you say blog or vlog?
I said vlog.
Yeah, because you could do a video blog as well, and they're both really good. But some of the things you talk about, like navigating a video, would make that really, compelling. You just have to have a way to promote it. And if your following is low, you're talking to people, but it's a small number. But almost every patient advocacy organization is looking for content. So if you send it to them, they'll like it and they'll share it with their constituents. So use that, get it out there as widely as you can. Don't just let it happen and use it on your own platforms. Try and get other people to use it as well. Yeah, and hashtag it right and all that stuff that makes a big difference, but it can make a big difference. It's definitely worth doing. It's a lot of work. I mean, doing a good video, it takes a while. Writing a blog takes a while, but it can be really helpful. Well, I'm happy to stick around and talk more, but you were all really terrific. Your stories are all amazing. So please use them as best you can. And talking about promoting things, if you do see get a segment on a local TV show, then tweet about it and put it on your LinkedIn and tell others to do that as well. Let the doctors in your community know. Let everybody know, because once it happens, people start just sharing it pretty easy, and it can go very far. So you get as much mileage out of it as you can. Great. It was so nice to hear your stories. You're amazing. You guys are you're terrific, and you just recognize that you're doing God's work. It's, you don't have to do this, and you're doing it because you want to help other people. There's a good place in heaven for you.